If you lived in the wilderness at the beginning of time, could you determine how many days are in the year without any equipment? Could you identify when the Earth was in the exact same position relative to the Sun a year ago without any instruments except that which you could find on the ground?
They don't do things that way anymore. This is the age of science know-how, electron marvels.
The number of days in a year have changed from 360 days in the past to 365 1/4 days today.
Apparently, the natural laws of our universe don't operate here.
The number of days in the lunar year went from 360 to 355 days today. Why? How? The greatest catastrophe the Earth has ever experienced in the past was the global flood. Could this flood be the cause of changing number of days in the year? Could this be the Genesis flood? Noah's flood? Really? Let's pretend, just pretend you were walking off the ark with Noah after the flood. Now, just pretending now. Hang in there with me. Could you tell Noah the number of days in the year and if they were changing? Year after year, the seasons would be going out of sync. Could you tell Noah how fast the days were changing and how many days to add to the end of the year to get the seasons back in sync? After viewing this video, I think you would be able to do that. I'll let you decide. Today in your backyard or on your driveway, you can perform an experiment that would tell Noah and others the answer to these questions. You can tell how many days are in the year, and you can tell if the number of days in the year are changing. You can create an analemma.
A what?
An analemma. An analemma is a measuring system that requires one stick, a gnomon, and at least 360 rocks. Take your gnomon and place it in your backyard or on your driveway. It should be vertical and it must be in the same exact place and orientation every day for a whole year. When the sun is at its highest, the shadow cast by the gnomon stick will be the shortest that day. Place a small rock at the tip of the shadow made by the gnomon. Do this every day until the last rock touches the first rock. If you use pecans or acorns instead of rocks, the squirrels might eat them, and you would have to start all over. At the end of a year, with Adam and Eve, you will have completed a double loop pattern on the ground with 360 rocks. On the 361st day, the shadow would be over the first rock and a new year would begin if you did this before the flood. Now, count the rocks. There would be 360 rocks to complete the pattern and thus 360 days in the year for Noah, Adam and Eve, and everything between Genesis 1:14 and Genesis 8:22. Today, however, there would be 365 rocks, and the gap between the last and first rock would be 25% of the gaps next to it. So what happened? We know there were 360 days in the year from ancient calendars and cultures. The ancient Egyptian calendar recorded a 360-day year. So did cultures in Asia Minor and India. The falsified calendars in early Greek and Syrian calendars also recorded a 360-day year. Even the 4th century BC calendar by Seculus Nicator, one of Alexander the Great's generals, consisted of 12 30-day months and leap days. After the Genesis flood, these cultures noticed that it took more rocks than 360 to complete the analemma. They concluded that the Earth was somehow spinning on its axis faster than before. In order to keep the calendar in sync with the seasons, they started adding days. 1 day, 2 days, 3, 4, 5, even 6 days to the end of the year, depending on how many more rocks than 360 were required to complete the analemma. Although they may not have precisely known why the number of days in the year were changing, references in the Vedic and classic Sanskrit text explain that the length of the year and the month changed. These manuscripts point to a cosmic upheaval in the remote past. They explain that we used to have a 360-day year, but the Earth underwent a total upheaval, and as a result, the Earth's period of revolution around the Sun in 360 days was changed to 365 days. This also caused the moon to undergo a serious perturbation, and the period of lunation was very probably changed. So, history clearly indicated that the number of days in the year have changed. The analemma shows how easy it was to determine the number of days in the year. So, what happened? What caused this change? Only the hydroplate theory explains all the details. The Genesis flood was a catastrophe. That statement is the greatest understatement of all time behind "He is risen and He made the stars also." So a brief history and review of the hydroplate theory is in order. For a more detailed view, see Brian Nichols' YouTube videos and Dr. Brown's book In the Beginning, Compelling Evidence for Creation and the Flood. Dr. Walt Brown, an MIT PhD in mechanical engineering focusing on heat transfer, developed the hydroplate theory and created the Center for Scientific Creation back in 1980. He also headed one of the Institute of Creation Research's ICR headquarters. Dr. Henry Morris, the creator of ICR, is considered the Copernicus of the modern creation movement, for he is credited with starting today's creation movement. Dr. Brown is considered the Isaac Newton of today's modern creation movement, for he put the science, math, and physics together to explain what happened during the global flood without resorting to miracles like plate tectonics does. Dr. Brown has made 57 scientific predictions. 9 have been verified as of mid-2019. Stop the video. As of 2021, we're now up to 12 confirmed predictions of the hydroplate theory. His 1980 theory goes like this. The Earth originally had a granite shell surrounding the Earth about 60 miles thick. Under this granite shell was the subsurface oceans. 20 years after Dr. Brown made his prediction, NASA discovered subsurface oceans on the moons of Enceladus, Europa, the asteroid Ceres, and 12 other moons in our solar system. In 2006, the Kola Superdeep Borehole Project, the deepest well drilled on Earth, discovered fossils 4 miles below the surface and water all along the drill path in the granite. In 2014, Steve Jacobson and his team discovered 3 times the volume of the Earth's surface oceans, 400 miles just under the continental United States. This further verifies Dr. Brown's theory of subsurface oceans. The water under this 60-mile thick granite shell became supercritical water because of the pressure and temperature. Supercritical water easily dissolves things. See my video on supercritical water and baby Jessica's rescue. Because of this supercritical water, the bottom of the 60-mile granite shell and the top of the underlying basalt were dissolved. The granite shell cracked and split, creating the American, European, and African continents. The supercritical water was now allowed to escape. It turned its temperature and pressure into speed. Lots and lots of speed. The supercritical water escaped through the cracked continents with hypersonic velocity, taking with it rocks, silt, mud, debris, and even marine plants and animals, and ejected them through gigantic fountains out into our solar system. Because of this mass ejection, part of the bottom 30 miles of the granite shell was ejected into space, and the remainder of the bottom 30 miles became the strata that we see covering the entire Earth. The part that covered the Earth came in 6 megasequences because of the water hammers temporarily cutting off the flow of the fountains. See my video on water hammers. It took 150 days for water to cover the entire Earth in these 6 major waves. Remember, Mount Everest, the highest mountain on Earth today, is made from strata laid down by water, and it contains fossils of marine animals at its peak. Before the flood, there were no mountains, only high hills. The basalt that was under the 60-mile granite, where it split, no longer had anything compressing it. Because the isostatic pressure was now out of balance, isostatic rebound occurred. The basalt expanded and pushed upward the bottom of the new Atlantic Ocean floor and created numerous tension cracks and the 46,000-mile-long mid-oceanic ridges. If plate tectonics is to believe, these tension cracks should be filled with lava, but they are not. They are partially filled with stratified sediments. Bob Dietz, the man who coined the term seafloor spreading in 1961 for plate tectonics, met every Wednesday for a year with Dr. Brown to discuss their ideas. After a year, Dietz agreed with Dr. Brown that these were tension cracks and that the seafloor was not spreading at all. This vertical expansion of the basalt created massive frictional forces penetrating down through the center of the Earth. This friction was so great it melted the rock deep inside the Earth, forming magma. There was no magma in the Earth before the flood, according to the hydroplate theory. Magma under pressure, below 220 miles, collapses to 50% of its solid rock volume, and consequently it sinks toward the core. This reduction in volume of magma created a vacuum, causing the Pacific continent to be sucked downward and fracture. The friction from the collapsing Pacific continent created even more friction, more heat, and more magma. Much of the magma rose through the shattered cracks in the Pacific continent and created over 40,000 volcanoes that were eventually covered by water. The magma below the 220-mile crossover depth continued to shrink and contract to half its volume. The result of all this newly created magma inside the Earth shrinking to half its volume reduced the Earth's diameter by about 180 miles. This shrinkage produced an increase in the Earth's spin rate, like a figure skater when they pull their arms in to spin faster and faster. After 40 days from the start of the flood, the days began to get shorter, but Noah couldn't tell, for he was in the ark for over a whole year. Now let's say you're on the ark with Noah. Once you and Noah were off the ark, could you create an analemma? Sure you could. When you did, would you notice that the analemma began to have gaps after the 360th rock was placed on the ground? Soon the 361st rock, 363rd rock, and 365th rock would be needed and added to complete the analemma. The days were indeed getting shorter. The Earth's spin was getting faster and faster. The angular inertia and momentum caused the Earth's spin rate to increase beyond the equilibrium point. Today the spin is slowing back to the equilibrium point, and we're adding leap seconds every month or so. This theory will not be taught in America's government schools. You've probably not heard of this hydroplate theory. I didn't either until 5 years ago. My background is cosmic ray physics. I had to investigate. I found the hydroplate theory answers this topic and many more as well. The number of published predictions coming true from Dr. Brown's theory is amazing. The theory explains why there are remnants of biological material throughout our solar system. It simply explains the formation of the Grand Canyon, the Ring of Fire, polystrate fossils, salt domes, pooled water under mountains, carbon-14 in old bones, round boulders on comets and asteroids, salt on Mars, lightning underground during earthquakes, binary asteroids, lightning creating radioactivity, mid-oceanic ridges, folded mountains, and many other phenomena. To support this, in 2019 they found the sunken continent of Zealandia east of Australia, part of the sunken Pacific continent. They found 3 more sunken continents in the Indian Ocean, confirming Dr. Brown's theory of a shrinking Earth. His predictions are being confirmed, and I'll post these in future videos. For now, we'll just have to be content to know why the Earth's year went from 360 days to 365.25 days per year. But what about the moon's year? Before the flood, the moon had a 360-day calendar year. Today, it's 355 days for the lunar year. So what happened to the moon? The hydroplate theory estimates that 3% of the Earth's mass was ejected into space when the fountains of the Great Deep broke open. If you take all the mass of all the asteroids, meteors, comets, and TNOs, the trans-Neptunian objects, they are less than 3% of the Earth's ejected mass. The hydroplate theory says before the flood there were no stray objects in our solar system. So all the asteroids came from Earth. All the shooting stars are pieces of the Earth returning home. At the end of creation week, God said his creation was very good. If there were asteroids flying around at thousands of miles per hour using the Earth for target practice, would that be very good? I think not. The moon before the flood was pristine. It had no craters, sort of like Pluto. It was the lesser light to rule the night. About 1.2% of the 3% of ejected material from the Earth actually hit the moon. These rocks and debris hit the near side of the moon with tremendous impact. The smaller rocks and debris created small craters on the moon, exploding when they hit, with the debris creating even more small craters. The larger rocks from the Earth penetrated the surface shell, allowing darker lava below the surface to rise and fill the impact zone. Part of this darker lava filled in some of the smaller craters, forming the ghost craters we see today. The result of these larger impacts sent shock waves through the moon to what is now the far side. The shock waves' constructive interference added and pushed the far side up and out. As the far side collapsed back down, it created the largest crater on the moon. But this collapsed crater is not an impact crater. The majority of the Earth material that embedded itself in the moon created great gravitational imbalances. NASA now admits that the oldest Earth rock ever found was found on the moon. This imbalance created by the Earth rocks embedding themselves into the moon created tidal locking of the moon. Tidal locking is when one side of an orbiting object always faces the object it is orbiting around. Today, because of the flood, we always see the man in the moon. The same side of the moon always faces us. It's almost as if God is trying to tell us something. And I think He is. The loss of mass from the Earth reduced its pull on the moon. The moon started moving away from the Earth. The orbit became larger, and the distance the moon had to travel around the Earth increased. The moon's speed in its orbit also slowed. It takes longer for the moon to go around the Earth. So, today the lunar year is 355 days, but before the flood it was 360. The same event changed both the Earth and the moon. The catastrophe called the flood, Noah's flood, or the Genesis flood, was the greatest upheaval the Earth has experienced since creation. This upheaval was so great many cannot understand. They can't comprehend it, or they can't even imagine it, or they don't want it to be true. The analemma is a system that allows anyone who wants to determine how many days there are in the year and if the days are changing. In the last 40 years, science, with all its new technology, is confirming the Bible over and over. The interesting thing about the hydroplate theory is that it is scientifically accurate and biblically sound. God says through the Bible that the flood He sent was a judgment against mankind. Mankind had become so wicked that man's thoughts were on sin and evil continually. God and Noah warned the people that the flood was coming. But the water cycle was so different before the flood, and there was no rain, just dew on the ground. The people had never seen rain, and they didn't believe nor respond. But God saved Noah and his family in the ark. He also saved 2 of the young of every air-breathing unclean animal, and 7 of the young of all the clean animals. One of the 7 animals was for a sacrifice after they left the ark. God says there is no forgiveness of sin without the shedding of blood. The sacrificing of one of each of the clean animals points to our Savior, Jesus the Christ. Isn't it interesting? Our children are programmed by the story of Noah and the flood to ignore the Jesus side of the flood. What child's book on the flood even mentions the 7s of the clean animals? But the flood shows that God has the authority to judge the earth because He owns it. He also has the authority to save the people on the earth. He did this by becoming a man, living a sinless life and dying on the cross, shedding His own blood, that whosoever believes in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. He offers you the free gift of life. All you have to do is accept it. Kinda makes you think, doesn't it? I'll let you decide.